Wounded girl was being auctioned after her brother's betrayal, until a lone cowboy gave up his horse to save her. Chapter 1. The Betrayal. The scorching Texas sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty streets of Amarillo, casting long shadows between the weathered wooden buildings. The year was 1885, and the town buzzed with the usual mix of cattle ranchers, drifters, and opportunists seeking their fortune in the unforgiving frontier. Sarah Mackenzie sat on the edge of her family's small homestead porch, her fingers tracing the faded letters on an old photograph of her parents. At 19, she'd already endured more hardship than most twice her age. Her parents had died from fever 3 years prior, leaving her and her older brother Thomas to work their modest ranch alone. "Sarah, we need to talk." Thomas's voice carried an unfamiliar coldness as he approached, his boots heavy against the wooden planks. She looked up, noticing the tension in his weathered face. At 25, Thomas had grown hard since their parents' death, his once kind eyes now reflecting the harsh realities of frontier life. "What is it, Tom?" she asked, setting the photograph aside. Thomas avoided her gaze, his hands fidgeting with his worn hat. "The ranch ain't making enough. The cattle got sick and we lost most of the herd. We can't pay the bank." Sarah's heart sank. She'd seen the worry lines deepening on her brother's face over the past months, but she hadn't realized how desperate their situation had become. "We'll figure something out," she said, standing and placing a reassuring hand on his arm. "We always do." Thomas pulled away sharply, his jaw clenching. "No, Sarah, I already figured it out." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. "I sold the ranch to pay the debts." The world seemed to tilt beneath Sarah's feet. You sold our home without telling me." "There's more," Thomas continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "The buyer, he's got plans for you." Sarah's blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" "Marcus Dalton. He runs the saloon in town. He's been asking about you and he made me an offer I couldn't refuse." Thomas's hands shook as he spoke. "He'll take care of you, Sarah. It's better than starving." "Tom, you can't be serious." Sarah's voice cracked with disbelief and growing terror. "You're my brother. You're supposed to protect me." "I am protecting you," Thomas exploded, his guilt transforming into anger. "You think I want this? You think I have a choice?" But Sarah saw the truth in his eyes. She saw the poker debts, the drinking, the choices that had led them to this moment. Her brother hadn't just failed to protect her, he had sold her to save himself. "The men are coming tomorrow morning," Thomas said, unable to meet her eyes. "Pack what you can carry." That night, Sarah lay awake in her small bed, staring at the ceiling she had known since childhood. The walls held memories of her parents' laughter, of Christmas mornings, of the dreams she had harbored, of maybe finding a good man someday and starting a family of her own. Now those dreams were being sold to the highest bidder. When dawn broke over the Texas plains, Sarah heard the sound of approaching horses. Through her window, she saw Marcus Dalton, a heavy-set man with cruel eyes and a reputation for treating women as property. Behind him rode 3 of his men, their faces hard and unsympathetic. "Time to go, Sarah," Thomas called from outside her door, his voice hollow. Sarah dressed in her simplest dress and gathered her few possessions, her mother's wedding ring, the photograph, and a small Bible. Her hands shook as she opened the door to face the man who had once been her protector. "I'll never forgive you for this," she whispered as she passed him. Thomas grabbed her arm, his eyes pleading. "Someday you'll understand. I had no choice." "There's always a choice, Tom," Sarah replied, pulling free. "You just chose yourself." As Marcus Dalton's men escorted her away from the only home she had ever known, Sarah didn't look back. She couldn't bear to see her brother standing there, watching her disappear into an uncertain and terrifying future. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound. In losing her home, she had also lost her faith in the one person she thought would always stand by her side. Chapter 2. The Auction Block. The journey to San Antonio took 3 days through the harsh Texas landscape. Sarah sat in the back of a wagon, her wrists bound, watching the endless expanse of prairie grass and mesquite trees roll by. The men spoke little, treating her more like livestock than a human being. On the second night, as they camped under a canopy of stars, Sarah attempted to escape. She had managed to loosen her bonds and was creeping away from the dying campfire when one of Dalton's men, a scarred brute named Jake, caught her. "Where you think you're going, girl?" he snarled, grabbing her roughly. Sarah fought back, clawing at his face, but Jake was stronger. He struck her across the cheek, sending her sprawling. The blow left a deep cut along her cheekbone, and blood trickled down her face. "Try that again, and it'll be worse," Jake threatened, retying her bonds even tighter. By the time they reached San Antonio, Sarah's spirit felt as wounded as her face. The cut had become infected, leaving her fevered and weak. The bustling frontier town overwhelmed her senses, the sounds of cattle lowing, men shouting, and the constant clatter of wagon wheels on dusty streets. Dalton led her to a large building on the outskirts of town. A hand-painted sign read, "Frontier Auctions, Livestock and Property." Sarah's stomach churned as she realized what was happening. "This is where you'll fetch the best price," Dalton explained with a cruel smile. "Got buyers coming from all over Texas, some looking for wives, others for other purposes." Sarah was locked in a small, windowless room with several other women. Some were young like her, others older and worn down by hard living. All shared the same look of resigned despair. "First time?" asked a woman named Maria, her voice kind despite the circumstances. She was perhaps 30, with prematurely grey hair and gentle eyes. Sarah nodded, unable to speak. "The key is to look strong," Maria whispered. "The cruel ones like their women broken, but the decent ones, if any show up, they prefer spirit. It might be the difference between a harsh life and a bearable one." The night before the auction, Sarah lay on a thin straw mattress, her infected wound throbbing. She thought about her parents, wondering what they would say if they could see her now. She thought about Thomas, and the anger that had been her constant companion began to mix with a profound sadness. The next morning, the auction began. Sarah was fifth in line, giving her time to watch the horrible proceedings. Men bid on women like cattle, examining them, discussing their potential uses with casual cruelty. When her turn came, Sarah was led onto a wooden platform in front of a crowd of rough-looking men. The auctioneer, a thin man with a nasal voice, began his pitch. "Here we have Miss Sarah Mackenzie, age 19, from Amarillo. She's got some spirit in her, as you can see from that scratch on her face, but nothing a firm hand can't handle." The crowd laughed, and Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. She forced herself to stand straight, remembering Maria's advice. "She can read and write, which some of you might find useful. Strong back, good for ranch work or other domestic duties." More laughter from the crowd. The bidding started at $20. Sarah watched in horror as men casually raised their hands, discussing her future as if she weren't standing right there. The price climbed steadily. $30, $40, $50. "I got 60 from the gentleman in the back," the auctioneer called out. Sarah looked toward the back of the crowd and saw a man with cold, calculating eyes. She had seen his type before, men who enjoyed causing pain. "70, called another voice. The bidding continued, each increase feeling like another nail in the coffin of her hopes. At $100, only two men remained in the bidding, the cruel-eyed man and a well-dressed rancher who kept glancing at her with an expression she couldn't read. $110, the rancher called out. The cruel-eyed man hesitated, then shook his head and walked away. Sarah felt a mixture of relief and continued dread. The rancher might be better than the alternative, but she was still being sold like property. Going once, going twice. $120! The voice came from the very back of the crowd, barely audible above the murmur of voices. Sarah strained to see who had spoken, but the crowd was too thick. $120 from the gentleman in the back, the auctioneer announced, clearly pleased with the higher bid. The rancher looked annoyed but made no counteroffer. Sarah's heart pounded as she realized her fate was being decided by someone she couldn't even see. Going once, going twice, sold to the gentleman in the back. As the crowd began to disperse, Sarah saw her buyer approaching. He was tall and lean, with sun-weathered skin and clothes that had seen better days. Most notably, he wore the distinctive hat and boots of a cowboy, but she could see no horse nearby. When he reached the platform, their eyes met for the first time. Unlike the other bidders, he didn't look at her with ownership or cruel intent. Instead, she saw something that surprised her: compassion. "Name's Jake Harrison," he said quietly, his voice carrying a slight drawl. "And don't worry, things ain't what they seem. As he paid the auctioneer, Sarah noticed him counting out coins and bills from different pockets, scraping together every cent he had. When he finished, his pockets were empty. "How did you pay for me?" Sarah asked as he led her away from the platform. Jake was quiet for a moment, then pointed to a group of men leading horses away from the auction grounds. "See that brown mare with the white blaze? That was mine. Been with me for 8 years. Traded her to get the money for your freedom." Sarah stopped walking, staring at him in disbelief. "You sold your horse for me?" "Sometimes a man's got to do what's right, even if it costs him everything he has," Jake replied simply. For the first time in days, Sarah felt tears that weren't born of despair. Someone had sacrificed for her. A complete stranger had given up his most valuable possession to save her from a fate worse than death. "Why?" she whispered. Jake looked at her wounded face, then met her eyes. "Because everybody deserves a chance at dignity, and because I know what it's like to have nowhere to turn." As they walked away from the auction ground, Sarah realized that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't yet imagine. For the first time since her brother's betrayal, she felt the smallest spark of hope. Chapter 3. The Cowboy's Story. Jake Harrison's camp was modest: a small fire, a worn bedroll, and a pack containing his few possessions. Without his horse, he had been traveling on foot, carrying everything he owned on his back. As the sun set over the Texas plains, he tended to Sarah's infected wound with surprising gentleness. "Hold still," he murmured, cleaning the cut with water from his canteen. "This is gonna sting some." Sarah winced but didn't pull away. "You don't have to do this. I'm not really your property, despite what that paper says." Jake paused in his ministrations, his blue eyes meeting hers. "You're right. You're not my property, and you're not anybody else's either. Soon as you're strong enough, you're free to go wherever you want. Then why did you buy me?" Jake was quiet for a long moment, his weathered hands steady as he bandaged her wound. "I suppose I should tell you my story so you understand." He settled back against his saddle, his gaze distant. "I wasn't always a drifter. Used to have a ranch up in Colorado with my wife Emma and our daughter Lucy. Lucy was about your age when—" His voice caught, and he had to stop. Sarah waited patiently, sensing the pain in his words. "There was a man named Colonel Briggs who wanted our land, had political connections, money, influence. When we wouldn't sell, he found other ways to get what he wanted." Jake's jaw tightened. "He hired men to make trouble. Cattle rustling, fence cutting, intimidation. When that didn't work, he had the sheriff arrest me on false charges." "What happened to your family?" "While I was in jail, Briggs's men came to the ranch. They told Emma and Lucy they had to leave, that the land was being seized for unpaid debts that didn't exist. When Emma refused—" Jake's voice trailed off, and Sarah could see the pain etched in every line of his face. "The fire was supposed to look like an accident. Lightning strike, they said. But I knew better. By the time I got out of jail, there was nothing left but ashes and 2 graves." Sarah felt her heart break for this man who had lost everything. "I'm so sorry." Spent the next 5 years hunting Briggs and his men, found most of them, and they paid for what they did. But revenge didn't bring my family back, and it didn't fill the emptiness inside. Jake poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks into the darkening sky. "I've been wandering ever since, doing odd jobs, trying to find some purpose. And you found it at an auction." Jake looked at her directly. "I found it when I saw a young woman being sold like cattle, while good people did nothing. Lucy would have been about your age now, and I kept thinking, what if it was her up there? What if she had nobody to speak for her?" Sarah felt tears threatening. "You gave up your horse, your only means of transportation, for a stranger. Bella was a good horse, and I'll miss her something fierce. But she was just a thing. You're a person with hopes and dreams and a future ahead of you." Jake's voice grew firm. "Nobody should have their freedom stolen from them." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars emerge in the vast Texas sky. Finally, Sarah spoke. "My brother sold me to pay his debts, gambling debts mostly. Said he didn't have a choice, but I think he was just too much of a coward to face the consequences of his actions." "That's a hard betrayal to carry," Jake said quietly. "I keep thinking about when we were children. He used to protect me from bullies, help me with my chores when I was sick. I thought that bond was unbreakable." Sarah's voice grew bitter. "I was wrong. People change when they're desperate. Not excusing what he did, but fear makes folks do terrible things sometimes." You were desperate too, but you didn't sell anyone out. Jake considered this. I had my family to fight for. Your brother, maybe he forgot what he was supposed to be fighting for. The next morning, Jake broke camp early. We need to get you somewhere safe, he explained. There are people who might come looking, thinking they have a legal claim on you. Where will we go? I know a place. There's a woman named Ruth Miller who runs a boarding house in Austin. She's helped other women in situations like yours. You can stay there until you figure out what you want to do with your life. As they began walking, Sarah realized she'd never asked the obvious question. What will you do? You've given up everything to help me. Jake shrugged. I'll find work. Maybe hire on with a ranch. Earn enough to buy another horse eventually. I've been getting by on foot for a few days now. I can manage. It's not right, Sarah said firmly. You shouldn't suffer because of my problems. I'm not suffering. For the first time in 5 years, I feel like I've done something that matters. Jake's voice carried a conviction that surprised them both. As they walked across the rolling hills of central Texas, Sarah found herself studying her unlikely rescuer. He was probably in his early 30s, with the lean build of a man who had spent his life doing hard physical work. His clothes were worn, but clean, and despite his losses, he carried himself with quiet dignity. Can I ask you something? She said. Sure. When you were bidding on me, why did you wait so long? You could have started earlier, maybe saved some money. Jake was quiet for a moment. I wanted to see who else was interested. If a decent man had been bidding, someone who might have treated you well, I might have let it go. But that first fellow, he shook his head. I could see the meanness in his eyes. So you were willing to sacrifice your horse only if you thought I was in real danger? I was willing to sacrifice everything to keep you from being hurt, but I'm not rich, Sarah. I had to be strategic about it. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, the Texas sun climbing higher in the sky. Despite everything she had been through, Sarah found herself feeling something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Jake, she said eventually. Yeah? Thank you. Not just for buying me, but for treating me like a person. It means more than you know. Jake touched the brim of his hat. Every person deserves to be treated with dignity. That's just basic human decency. As they crested a hill, Sarah could see the outskirts of Austin in the distance. Soon, she would be starting a new chapter of her life, one that would have been impossible without the sacrifice of a lone cowboy who had given up his most prized possession to save a stranger. Chapter 4. Ruth Miller's Haven. Ruth Miller's boarding house stood on a quiet street in Austin, its whitewashed walls and green shutters offering a stark contrast to the harsh frontier towns Sarah had become accustomed to. The building exuded warmth and safety, with flower boxes on the windows and a well-maintained garden. Ruth herself was a formidable woman in her 50s, with silver hair pulled back in a practical bun and keen eyes that seemed to miss nothing. She took one look at Sarah's bandaged face and Jake's worn appearance, and immediately ushered them inside. You must be Jake Harrison, she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone used to taking charge. I got your telegram. And this must be Sarah, Jake nodded, removing his hat. Yes, ma'am. I'm grateful you agreed to help. Ruth studied Sarah with the practiced eye of someone who had seen too many wounded souls. How old are you, dear? 19, ma'am. And you can read and write? Yes, ma'am. My mother taught me. Ruth's expression softened slightly. Good. That'll make things easier. She turned to Jake. You did the right thing, Mr. Harrison. Too many men would have walked away. I couldn't live with myself if I had, Jake replied simply. Ruth showed Sarah to a small but comfortable room on the second floor. It had a real bed with clean sheets, a washstand, and a window that looked out onto the garden. After days of uncertainty and fear, the simple luxury of a safe place to sleep felt overwhelming. The other ladies are out doing their work, Ruth explained. You'll meet them at dinner. Most of them have stories similar to yours. Women who found themselves in impossible situations and needed a fresh start. What kind of work do they do? Honest work. I run a cleaning service for the businesses in town. We also take in sewing and mending. It's not easy money, but it's respectable, and it gives women like you a chance to earn their independence. Downstairs, Ruth poured coffee for Jake and settled across from him at the kitchen table. How much do you know about her situation? Jake explained about the auction, Sarah's brother's betrayal, and the infection that had weakened her. Ruth listened without interruption, her expression growing darker with each detail. That brother of hers should be horsewhipped, she said finally. Family's supposed to protect each other, not sell each other out. She's hurt by it, something fierce, Jake observed. The betrayal might be harder to heal than the physical wound. Ruth nodded knowingly. I've seen it before. When the people who are supposed to love you turn their backs, it shakes your faith in everything. She'll need time to learn to trust again. Will you be able to help her? I'll do my best. But recovery isn't something you can do for someone else. They have to choose it themselves. Ruth studied Jake's face. What about you? Where will you go from here? Jake shrugged. I'll find work, maybe head south toward San Antonio, see if any of the ranches need hands. Without a horse? I'll manage. Done it before. Ruth was quiet for a moment, then made a decision. I could use a handyman around here. The boarding house always needs repairs, and I've got a small stable out back for the ladies who can afford horses. The pay isn't much, but it includes room and board. Jake looked surprised. That's generous, ma'am, but I don't want charity. It's not charity, it's good business. A boarding house full of women needs a man around for protection and heavy work. You'd be earning your keep. I appreciate the offer, but I think it might be better if I move on. Sarah needs space to heal, and having me around might be a reminder of everything. Ruth studied him shrewdly. Or it might be a reminder that there are still good people in the world, but it's your choice. That evening, Sarah joined the other women for dinner. There were 6 of them, ranging in age from barely 18 to nearly 40. Each had her own story of hardship and survival. Mary, a widow whose husband had died in a mining accident, was trying to support her young son. Rebecca had fled an abusive marriage and was hiding from her husband. Anna had been orphaned and sold into servitude before escaping to Austin. The first few weeks are the hardest, Mary told Sarah, as they helped clear the dinner dishes. You keep waiting for someone to come drag you back to your old life, but after a while you realize you're really free. How long have you been here? Sarah asked. Nearly a year. I've saved enough money to rent a small place for me and my boy. We'll be moving out next month. The idea of genuine independence, of being able to choose her own path, seemed almost too good to be true to Sarah. What if I'm not strong enough? You're stronger than you think, Rebecca said firmly. You survived the auction, didn't you? That takes courage. I didn't survive it. Jake saved me. And what did you do when that man tried to hurt you during the journey? Did you fight back? Sarah nodded. Then you're a survivor. Mr. Harrison gave you a chance, but you're the one who has to make the most of it. Outside, Jake was preparing to leave. He had decided that staying would only complicate Sarah's recovery, and he didn't want to be a burden on Ruth's hospitality. Ruth found him checking his pack. In the stable. You're making a mistake, she said without preamble. How so? That girl's been betrayed by the most important man in her life. She's going to have a hard time trusting any man again. But you showed her that men can be decent, that they can sacrifice for others without expecting anything in return. If you disappear now, it might confirm her worst fears. Jake paused in his packing. What are you suggesting? Stay for a week. Let her see that you're not going to abandon her the moment things get difficult. Give her a chance to say goodbye properly. And after that, you do whatever you think is best, but give her the chance to heal from your kindness instead of wondering if it was too good to be true. Jake considered this, realizing that Ruth was probably right. His abrupt departure might feel like another betrayal to Sarah, even if that wasn't his intention. 1 week, he agreed. 1 week, Ruth confirmed. And Jake, thank you. What you did, it gives me hope that there are still good men in this world. The next morning, Sarah was surprised to find Jake working in the garden behind the boarding house. I thought you were leaving, she said. I was planning to, but Ruth convinced me to stay a few more days, help with some repairs, earn a bit of money for the road. Sarah felt a surge of relief that surprised her. I'm glad. I was worried I might not get the chance to thank you properly. You don't owe me thanks. Yes, I do. You gave up everything for a stranger. That's not something you forget. As they worked side by side in the garden, Sarah began to understand that healing wasn't just about time. It was about learning to trust again, one small step at a time. And Jake Harrison, the cowboy who had sacrificed his horse to save her, was teaching her that not all men were like her brother. Some were willing to give up everything to do what was right. Chapter 5. Building Trust. The week Jake had promised to stay stretched into 2, then 3. Ruth kept finding projects that needed his attention. A loose board on the porch, a window that wouldn't close properly, a fence that needed mending. Jake suspected she was creating work to justify his continued presence, but he didn't mind. For the first time in years, he felt useful in a way that had nothing to do with violence or revenge. Sarah's wound healed slowly, but her spirit began to mend as well. She threw herself into work with the other women, learning to appreciate the simple dignity of earning her own money. The boarding house operated like a well-organized business, with each woman contributing according to her abilities. "You're good with numbers," Ruth observed one evening as Sarah balanced the accounts. "Have you ever thought about keeping books professionally?" "I helped my father with the ranch accounts when I was younger," Sarah replied, "but I never thought of it as real work." "Real work is whatever puts food on the table and keeps a roof over your head," Ruth said firmly. "And there's plenty of businesses in Austin that could use someone with your skills." The idea of having a profession, of being valued for her abilities rather than her appearance, was still foreign to Sarah, but she found herself considering possibilities she had never imagined. One afternoon, as Jake repaired a section of fence, Sarah brought him a glass of water. "Can I ask you something?" "Course. Do you regret it, giving up your horse for me?" Jake paused in his work, considering the question seriously. "I miss Bella something fierce. She was a good horse, and we'd been through a lot together. But regret it? No. Even though you're stuck here doing odd jobs instead of riding the range." Jake smiled. "I'm not stuck anywhere. I'm choosing to be here. There's a difference. But you could have your old life back if you just walked away from the auction. My old life was wandering from place to place, carrying anger and looking for someone to blame for my family's death. That's not living. That's just existing." Jake resumed his work on the fence. "Helping you. It reminded me what it feels like to do something good." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "I've been thinking about my brother lately. Not the man who sold me, but the boy who used to protect me. I keep wondering what happened to him." "Fear changes people," Jake said gently. "Sometimes it makes them stronger. Sometimes it makes them weaker. Your brother chose the weak path. Do you think he regrets it?" "I think he's probably trying real hard not to think about it at all. Regret's a heavy thing to carry." That evening, Sarah found herself on the boarding house porch, watching the sunset paint the Austin sky in shades of orange and pink. Jake joined her, settling into the chair beside her. "Penny for your thoughts?" he asked. "I was thinking about the future. For the first time in months, I can imagine having one. What do you see?" Sarah considered this. "Maybe a small office where I keep books for local businesses. A place of my own eventually. Maybe even," she trailed off, suddenly shy. "Maybe what? Maybe a family someday, with someone who wouldn't sell me out when times got tough." Jake nodded. "You'll have all of that. You're strong, Sarah. Stronger than you know." "How can you be so sure?" "Because I've seen how you handle adversity. You don't give up, even when everything seems hopeless. That's not common." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. Sarah found herself studying Jake's profile, noting the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the gentle way he spoke to the other women at the boarding house. "Jake, yeah? What will you do when you leave here?" Jake was quiet for a long moment. "I've been thinking about that. Ruth offered to let me stay on permanent, but I don't want to overstay my welcome." "You're not overstaying anything. Everyone here likes having you around. What about you?" The question hung in the air between them. Sarah felt her heart skip a beat as she realized what he was really asking. "I like having you around too," she said softly. "You make me feel safe. Safe enough to start over, safe enough to trust again. That's something I didn't think I'd ever feel." Jake reached over and took her hand, his touch gentle and reassuring. "You deserve to feel safe. You deserve to feel valued. And you deserve to choose your own path." "What if I wanted to choose a path that included you?" The question surprised them both. Sarah hadn't planned to say it, but the words felt right. Jake squeezed her hand. "I'd be honored to walk any path with you, but I want to make sure you're choosing for the right reasons." "What do you mean?" I mean, I want to make sure you're choosing me, not just choosing the first man who treated you decent. You've been through a lot, Sarah. You deserve to be sure about what you want." Sarah appreciated his concern, but she also felt a flash of irritation. "I'm not a child, Jake. I can make my own decisions." "I know you can. But sometimes when we've been hurt, We rush toward the first person who shows us kindness. I don't want you to wake up one day and realize you settled for me out of gratitude. Is that what you think this is? Gratitude? Jake met her eyes. I hope not, but I want you to be sure. Sarah pulled her hand away, suddenly frustrated. How can I be sure of anything? A month ago, I was being sold like cattle. Now I'm sitting on a porch, holding hands with a man who gave up his horse to save me. Nothing in my life makes sense anymore. That's exactly why you need time to figure things out. And what if I don't want time? What if I want to grab hold of the first good thing that's happened to me in months? Jake stood up, his expression troubled. Sarah, I care about you. More than I should, probably. But I won't take advantage of your gratitude or your vulnerability. So you're going to make my choices for me? I'm going to give you space to make them clearly. With that, Jake walked inside, leaving Sarah alone on the porch. She sat there for a long time, torn between anger and understanding. Part of her appreciated his protective instincts, but another part resented being treated like she couldn't trust her own feelings. Inside the boarding house, Ruth found Jake in the kitchen, staring out the window. Trouble in paradise? She asked dryly. I don't want to hurt her. And you think protecting her from her own choices is the way to do that? Jake turned to face her. She's been through too much. She needs time to heal before she makes any big decision. Jake Harrison, you're a good man, but you're also a fool. Ruth's voice was gentle but firm. That girl has had everyone in her life make decisions for her. Her brother, the men who bought and sold her, even you when you rescued her. Don't you think it's time someone let her choose for herself? What if she chooses wrong? Then she'll learn from it and choose better next time. That's what growing up means. Jake considered this, realizing that Ruth might be right. In trying to protect Sarah, he might be doing exactly what everyone else had done, taking away her agency. What do you think I should do? I think you should trust her to know her own mind. And I think you should be honest about your own feelings instead of hiding behind noble intentions. That night, as Sarah lay in bed, she thought about Jake's words. She understood his concern, but she also felt confident in her feelings. The connection between them wasn't just gratitude, it was something deeper, something that had grown from shared adversity and mutual respect. Tomorrow, she decided, she would make her position clear. She had been sold, betrayed, and treated like property, but she would not be protected from her own choices, not even by someone who meant well. For the first time in her life, Sarah Mackenzie was ready to fight for what she wanted. Chapter 6. Choosing her own path. The next morning dawned clear and crisp, with a hint of autumn in the air. Sarah woke early, her mind made up about the conversation she needed to have with Jake. She found him in the stable, brushing down one of Ruth's horses with the same gentle care he had shown her infected wound. We need to talk, she said without preamble. Jake looked up, noting the determined set of her jaw. All right, I've been thinking about what you said last night, and I understand your concern. But I need you to understand something too. Jake set down the brush and gave her his full attention. I know the difference.